Previously, he also spent over a decade at the World Economic Forum, where he served as the Chief Representative Officer for China and earlier head of the Forum of Young Global Leaders.
So many people think that leaders are the most confident or the loudest in the room. But from your experience, what actually defines a true leader and what traits should a true leader actually have?
Again, that sort of being clear about the why you're doing something helps a lot with confidence. And if the why is clear in your mind, then the how and the what you need to do, is a lot easier. So confidence is helpful. You are the founder of your life. Your life is a startup. You come into this world with nothing. Maybe, if you're lucky, you get a little boost from your parents or from the place you live. But essentially, we are all the founders of our own lives. And if there's one thing I've learned from entrepreneurship, because I wasn't really an entrepreneur until after I left the World Economic Forum, it's that entrepreneurship is going from failure to failure without losing hope.
Hi, I'm Nayantara.
And I'm Abhyuday, and we are the co-founders of Project Young Minds, a non-profit service-based organization with the mission statement of making knowledge accessible to all. Welcome back to our podcast series, The Leadership Seat with Abhyuday and Nayantara, where we hope to explore real-world ideas, bridge divides in society, and spark curiosity amongst the youths.
Today, we have with us Mr. David Aikman. Mr. David Aikman, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure, happy to do so. David Aikman. I started out my career with the Olympics, working for the International Olympic Committee. I was born in Canada, and I've made my whole career in Switzerland and overseas. And from the Olympics, I went to something called the World Economic Forum, which organizes a big conference in Davos, Switzerland every year, which brings together business leaders, political leaders, entrepreneurs, and young leaders. And with that organization, I got to go to China to run the China office. And now I'm back in Switzerland, and I'm running my own organization, which is helping leaders become better fathers. And so, throughout my career, I've been engaged in, I would say, bringing people together. The Olympics brings people together through sport. The World Economic Forum brings people together through, current affairs and dealing with the business of the world. And so I guess that's how I consider myself. I'm a convener. And I like to bring people together for impact.
As Mr. David pointed out, he's a founder of the Fathership Forge, which helps leaders who want sustainable performance at work and a real connection back home. He also founded Improvability, where he has driven positive business impact by using generative AI to make ESG accessible and more value-driven. Previously, he also spent over a decade at the World Economic Forum, where he served as the Chief Representative Officer for China and earlier head of the Forum of Young Global Leaders and Global Shapers community.
So, to begin, could you briefly tell us about your journey and what first drew you to working with leadership and communities like the Young Global Leaders and the Young Global Shapers?
So I think my fascination with leadership goes back to when I was your age. When I was 17, I went to something called a United World College, which brings young people together from around the world to do their international baccalaureate. And when I was there, I saw the headmaster of the school, how he would organize and mobilize the whole community. And I was just fascinated because we had weekly town hall meetings where people would bring the challenges that they were dealing with or improvements they wanted to see at the school. And the headmaster was so artful in balancing the needs of the students, the realities of the college, the needs of the faculty. And that just made me curious about, how do how do people lead different groups, and how do they make things happen? And I got very interested in something called servant leadership, which was a book written by Robert Greenleaf, and another book called The Tao of Leadership, which was very much focused on leading by consensus and leading from behind. And so I really just got sort of fascinated with that. And in university, I was part of a program called the President's Leadership Class, which chose 10 students from different disciplines. And as part of our studies, we did leadership training, leadership development, and we spent a year overseas in doing volunteer work and impact work. And so I spent a year in South America as part of my university. And when I look back on my career, I feel like that ethos is something I carried throughout my whole career. United World Colleges was bringing people together through education for peace. As I said, the Olympics was about bringing the world together through sport. And so being a leader within those systems and trying to figure out what makes a good leader and how to be an effective leader is just something that I've always been fascinated by and I've always been working at. And I think that's the most important thing. Leadership is a practice. It's not something, I don't think it's something you're born into. I think it's something that you work at and you develop it. It's a skill like any other skill. And I think, by being conscious and by being thoughtful about it, I've seen, leaders be really successful. And so, yeah, sort of leadership and leadership development's been a part of my life ever since I was your age.
Okay, so when you meet people from around the world, what signs immediately signal to you a sign of future leadership in young people, especially, say, young people from countries such as Nepal?
Yeah, I think there's some common characteristics that I've seen over the years, in all of the global shapers that I've met, in the young global leaders, but also top CEOs and political leaders. Um, One of the most important ones, I think, is curiosity. If you're not curious about the way the world works or why different people think different things from you, if you're not curious about the issues, you're not curious about the people, I don't think you can be a very effective leader. I think probably the second thing I've seen is around optimism and sort of having a view and a hope for the future, or a vision for how things can be different than how you see them. Klaus Schwab, who was the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, um, told me one day, he said, "David, you need to learn how to be happy, but not satisfied." And every time we would have a successful meeting or we would launch a successful initiative, we would take the moment to celebrate it. We would be happy with what we accomplished, but we'd also be thinking about how could we do it better next time, or what didn't work so well and how could we make that better. And I think that's a very difficult state of mind or mindset to cultivate. But I think it's a really important one, which is to be optimistic about the future, but to be also ambitious and striving for making it better, and recognizing, being grounded in reality and seeing that maybe things aren't as good as they could be, but having that optimism and that sense of ambition of we can make it better. And I think that links into another thing that I've seen with a lot of successful leaders, particularly young leaders, which is that sense of duty and that sense of wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to make their communities better, and a sort of a sense of duty and a sense of responsibility, like nobody else is stepping up to do this, so we need to do something, or I need to do something about it. And I guess the last thing is, which is probably something we'll come back to, because something I really believe strongly in is perseverance and determination. It's too easy to give up when things get tough, whether it's in entrepreneurship or whether it's in impact. And I think I've never met a leader of any age who has not had to work really hard to get to where they are, and has had to overcome setback after setback, And so I think that that perseverance is really key, that determination. Um, and again, it's sort of, for me, it's kind of the counterbalance to the curiosity. It's like you're curious about something, you want to learn more, and you've got to be determined enough to, to stick to it and to explore it fully. So those are some of the things that I've seen as I've sort of met, leaders of all level and all ages around the world.
So many people think that leaders are the most confident or the loudest in the room. But from your experience, what actually defines a true leader and what traits should a true leader actually have?
I mean, of course, confidence is helpful, right? I mean, you have to believe in yourself and you have to believe in what you're doing. Um, and I think again, that sort of being clear about the why you're doing something helps a lot with confidence. And if the why is clear in your mind, then the how and the what you need to do, is a lot easier. So confidence is helpful. But every single good leader that I've met has had moments of doubt, of where they've lacked self-confidence, where they've been unsure about their path. I've had those moments, and I think there, what becomes really important is not only your why are you doing that, and that's sort of like your North Star, that's your compass. But it's also having the radar and having the feedback to be able to talk to people and to to get intelligence and get feedback from other people, that can then help you overcome that self-doubt and so on. I mean, I think real leadership in my view, um, lifts people up. It doesn't push people down. I talked before about service and servant leadership. I really believe that real leadership, puts others before yourself, and it comes from a place of caring, of wanting to make the world a better place, or wanting to see the people you work with be the best versions of themselves, wanting your friends at school to be successful. So, I think society tends to reward the people who are loud and upfront and top down, but the real leadership, I think, comes from lifting other people up and putting other people first. And the leaders I've seen do that have incredible loyalty, incredible power, incredible influence, rather than the sort of the boisterous, noisy one who sort of might be a flash in the pan and here today, gone tomorrow. But leadership that lasts over years and generations tends to be a quieter, more service-oriented leadership, in my view.
Could you please expand more on these times of self doubt? What is one, say, mistake that you often see young change makers make today? Or what are mistakes that maybe you perhaps made when you were trying to make change in the world?
So I think one of the things is impatience, and I'm guilty of this, wanting things to go faster than they can. So I think one of the mistakes I see often is sort of scale and I guess scale and speed, of folks thinking that people thinking that um, change can happen more broadly and more quickly than they imagine, or that is reality. Um, so, for example, when we started the Global Shapers, which is a community that's now 12,000 people across 155 countries. Um, we started small. We started just trying to get the first 10 hubs, the first 20, first 100 hubs. But there was a lot of pressure from different people, different stakeholders, different leaders saying, "Oh, you've got to get all the young people around the world focused on one issue, and you've got to get all these people working on the same thing." And I felt very strongly that that wasn't the way that change happens, and that if we did that, we wouldn't have real engagement from the young people. I really favored a distributed model. And so what we said to the global shapers was find a problem in your community, find an issue that is local where you can have impact. Um, and and that led to the most amazing different initiatives around the world that were completely different from one another. So in Mumbai, it was hosting an art exhibition, a photography competition to highlight domestic violence. In San Francisco, it was building up free Wi-Fi for homeless people so that they could get on the internet and find a job or get the services that they needed. Um, in China, it was about getting young women to be more involved in tech um, companies and on entrepreneurship. And so it looked very different around the world. But now, today, the impact is 3,000 projects and initiatives, 20 million people served through those initiatives. And so, I think there's a temptation to look at, oh, big global things. We've got to change the world and we got to change it now. And in fact, change happens locally. It starts with yourself, it starts with your community. And everything that you learn in working on a project in your community or trying to make your school or your town or your community better, all of that can be extrapolated to the global level. And so the skills that you learn, the leadership that you develop on that small basis is something that can scale up impact over time. And so, what I encourage young leaders to focus is, don't do, my grandmother used to say, by the yard, it's hard, but by the inch, it's a cinch. And oftentimes, if you look at a great big problem like climate change or inequality, you think I just can't do anything about it. The problem is too big, it's too impersonal. I just don't know how to do anything. And you can get really depressed and really demotivated and feel really powerless. But actually, if you focus on locally, here's something I can do, here's how I can help the person next to me, the person in front of me, then you build that muscle, that leadership muscle, that impact muscle, and you have a greater and greater impact over time. So start small and be patient.
So you've mentioned that leadership is not about seeking titles or visibility, but rather it's about to helping others and not being in the spotlight. So why do you think that leaders should focus more on not being in the spotlight, but just boosting others altogether?
So I love there's a saying which is character or integrity is what you do when nobody's looking. And I find oftentimes we have this idea of leadership as it's the guy at the top, and I'll say it's guy because it's often a man, who's leading from above and inspiring people to do things. And in fact, true leadership happens on a daily basis. It's leadership of yourself, it's leadership of the people around you, and the communities. And I think too often we focus on grand gestures and big moments, and leadership for me is really about showing up. It's showing up and being present. It's being there even when you don't feel like it, even when you don't feel good enough, even when you don't feel happy enough. There were moments when I was leading teams and I had to tell myself, David, you're the sunshine pump. Like if you go into the office with a bad mood, it's going to affect everybody. Everybody's going to be wondering, oh, what did I do wrong? Why is the boss unhappy or whatever? And so I had to literally say, like, okay, change the software, change the mentality. You got to go in there with a different attitude because your moods, your behavior has such a big impact. And that was like a daily thing. That wasn't because I was standing up in front of 2,000 people giving a speech. That was just because my team needed me to be there and to be present. And you your values as a leader, as a person, are transmitted through those small actions, through those day-to-day tasks. And I remember there was one moment. So I was in China during COVID, and and we were in Switzerland when the outbreak happened. We were on holiday after the Davos meeting, but my team started calling me from China saying, David, there's this thing going on in Wuhan. We don't know what's happening. We can't get information. We can't get masks, protective equipment. We're really scared. And so I called up the boss of the WEF and I said, look, I need to go back to China. And he's like, well, maybe you need to wait. Let's see what the situation is. And I said, no, Klaus, I can't do that. I'm the leader of the team. The team is in trouble. I need to go back and be there. Captain doesn't abandon the ship when the storms get tough. So with my family, we went around to all the hospitals in Geneva. We got masks and protective gear, took it back. And then we didn't leave for 2.5 years because, COVID sort of took the world apart. But during that time, when the World Economic Forum was undergoing its own challenges of, there were no more events, not sure we can bring people together anymore. And the order came down from Geneva that we had to fire staff because, we couldn't host our meetings. We weren't sure how we were going to make money. And so as a protective, measure, they said, okay, well, you need to fire 5 people. And I didn't want to do that. People were suffering. They were worried about their jobs. They were worried about their family, worried about their health. And so I went to my leadership team and I said, guys, what are we going to do? Geneva wants us to fire people. And, we need to come up with a solution. And 2 things happened. One, the first thing was my team said to me, my senior leaders said, you know what? We're all going to take a pay cut so that we can make the salaries for everybody else. That wasn't my leadership, but that was my values that I had infused into the leadership team coming back to me. I didn't come up with that idea. That was my leadership team. And I was so moved. I was so inspired. I was like, absolutely. Yeah, I'll take a pay cut so we can keep everybody. And the second thing they said was, well, look, if the issue is we've got to make sure we've got partners, we've got to make sure we've got events, let's get everybody in the office focused on this. It's not the business team. We got the government team. We got the content team, whatever. Let's get every single person in this office focused on the business and making sure that we're bringing in the money so that we can pay everybody's salaries. And in the end, we didn't fire anybody. And we became the only team within the World Economic Forum that grew during COVID, that grew the revenues and grew the partnerships and grew the funding. And that was not, my leadership standing from up top, here's what we're going to do. Of course, I was there as the cheerleader, the motivator, but it was because that day-to-day practice of leadership and what are our values and what's good ethics had just infused the whole team. And we came together and had a huge success. So for me, it's so much about that leadership from a place of service and from a place of contribution and giving that matters.
So, if you could give one piece of advice to young people or, say, young leaders who want to make change in the world, right, what would it be?
I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier around determination. And I think it comes back to entrepreneurship. You are the founder of your life. Your life is a startup. You come into this world with nothing. Maybe, if you're lucky, you get a little boost from your parents or from the place you live. But essentially, we are all the founders of our own lives. And if there's one thing I've learned from entrepreneurship, because I wasn't really an entrepreneur until after I left the World Economic Forum, it's that entrepreneurship is going from failure to failure without losing hope. And it's kind of the same thing in life. And I think keep moving forward, being able to try and keep the forward momentum even when things are against you, I think is absolutely critical skill, and absolutely that tenacity and that persistence is almost always the differentiator between failure and success. Um, and I think one of the other things that I would give advice, which I always have said to my team, if any of my team ever sees this podcast, they'll be laughing because people would sometimes come to me and say, "Oh, David, I want a promotion. I want to be operating at a higher level." And I used to always tell them the same thing, which is that you need to invest ahead of the curve. So if you want to be a director, you need to show me that you have the skills, the responsibility, the maturity, the span of control, that you're doing the work of a director. And then, yes, I need to promote you to being a director because you're already operating at that level. And too often people are like, well, I, I want the title, I want the promotion, and then I'll do the work. And in my experience, that never works out. Life just doesn't work that way. Nobody's gonna give you something when you haven't earned it. And so I think that's, I say it to my kids, I say it to my team, is like you've got to invest ahead of the curve. You have to do the work, put in the hours, put in the hardship, and then the reward will come along. Now, I mean, the world isn't always fair. Sometimes you work hard and don't get rewarded, but generally speaking, like I've seen, that's one of the biggest maybe mistakes that I've seen people make, is that they expect that something should be handed to them before they've done the work and before they've made the investment.
So, when you see young change makers globally, right, what are certain traits or qualities that really stand out to you? And say for someone young that maybe wants to make an impact in the world but doesn't have the resources or the connections, what advice would you give to them?
So beyond thinking like the entrepreneur, which I think is important, because like the entrepreneurial mindset is about, what is the pain point or problem out there? What are the existing solutions that aren't working, and why is my solution better? Like that's just a framework that I think is helpful when thinking about impact, when thinking about influence, and so on. But then I guess the next piece of advice is just get started. Like too many entrepreneurs like wait, and they're working on something and they want it to be perfect, and in fact, like you're better off just doing something, even if it's wrong, or even if it's rough and unfinished. You will learn more by doing something imperfect than you will by sitting there thinking and working on something until it's perfect and then launching it into the world. So, as an entrepreneur, you got to ship the product, get it out there, start the impact initiative, whatever. And by doing that, you're going to learn a ton. You're going to learn so much because people are going to give you feedback, or it's not going to work out the way you thought. You're going to discover a regulation that you didn't know, or whatever it is. And I think, as in entrepreneurship, as in life, I think that you know sitting around thinking and talking isn't going to get you anywhere. Have a bias towards action. Um, the other thing I would say is that, about, young people often worrying that they don't have connections or they don't have the resources. I mean, this was the problem when each global shaper hub, when they started out. Um, but in my experience, if you start on something and then you become the convener, you invite people into your project, you invite people to meetings about the problem, you become the convener, and actually the convener has a ton of power. The convener decides what we're going to talk about. The convener decides who's in the room, and so on. And so what ends up happening when you are the convener is you end up creating the network, and everybody's there because of you and because of what you've brought them together to talk about or to work on. And then all of a sudden you will have developed the network and the power and the connections that you need to be successful. So, take responsibility, and take action, and be the convener, be an entrepreneur and be a convener. And I guess the last thing I'll say is just in my experience, like one act of kindness always sparks another. So if you're doing what you're doing from a place of kindness and love, it has tremendous impact on the world and on the people involved.
So, looking back at your journey, was there any moment of failure or doubt that actually like helped you shape your leadership even more?
Absolutely. Um, I had, I guess, what I would call like an epic fail of leadership, and that's when I first started at the World Economic Forum, and I was given a promotion. I was given a lot of power at a very young age, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to behave. So I was sort of copying all the people around me, and trying to figure it out as I was going on. And I got a 360 performance review. And that's where, everybody gets a bunch of questions about you and gives their feedback anonymously. And I got the results of my review, and I thought they'd mixed up the papers. I went to human resources and I said, I think you gave me the wrong feedback. I don't recognize this person. Like, this is not me. And they said, no, that's the right feedback form. That's how your team views you. And I was so shocked because they thought I was ruthless. They thought I was political. They thought I would do, anything to get ahead. I was overly ambitious. And so, I didn't know what to do with this. So I went back to HR and I said, okay, I need some help. Like, I need a coach or something because I don't know what to do. This is not me. This is not who I want to be. And I can't believe I'm such a terrible leader. And two things. One, an old mentor of mine who was actually a professor of mine at business school. I talked to him. This guy named Bill George, who wrote a wonderful book called Authentic Leadership, which I highly recommend. And he said to me, he said, David, you're not a different person when you walk from your dining room, or your kitchen into your dining room. Why would you be a different person when you walk from home into the office? And I think I had this idea that as a leader, I had to be super strong, I had to be tough, I had to be whatever. I had this idea. And so every day when I went into the office, it was like I was putting on armor or I was putting on a mask. And working with the coach, he said to me, he said, David, you need to figure out who you want to be as a leader. Like, who is your authentic self? What are your values as a leader? And you need to lead from that place. You need to lead from a place of authenticity, of values, of vulnerability. And if the World Economic Forum doesn't like that, well, that's their problem, not yours. But right now, you're twisting yourself into knots. You're doing all sorts of things, trying to be what you think they want you to be. And of course, you're failing because you don't know what your bosses want you to be. You don't know, so you're complete phony baloney. And that was super powerful when I with my coach, developed the courage to say, okay, it's not how I want to lead. Yes, this is a very political place. Yes, people are very ruthless, but that's not how I want to be. That's not who I am. And the moment I did that, and that was in the very early days of when I'd just been given responsibility for the Forum of Young Global Leaders. The moment I got in touch with that, with my values and my authentic self, and I brought that to work, everything changed. And I got so much more successful, and I got so much more effective at my job as a result, that I don't think I'd be where I am today if that setback hadn't happened, if that moment of truth I hadn't been confronted with my own demons and my own failings as a leader. Um, and right around that time as well, I think a few years later was when I started working with fathers, leaders and fathers, because I saw so many CEOs who had done the same thing as me. They were sacrificing everything to have their career. They were, ruthless at the office or whatever, and they didn't know how to behave at home, and they didn't know how to connect with their kids. And so I started a monthly dads group of young global leaders. And I've come back to that now later in my life because I just feel that that's something that's still there's still a need out there, and there's still leaders who are struggling with how to lead from that place of authenticity and their authentic self.
So, for you as a leader, do you think that a leader defines their team or the team actually defines their leader?
Well, you can't be a leader without followers, that's for sure. And I think in my experience, leadership kind of emerges. I really feel that oftentimes it's the leaders in a group who are most uncomfortable with the situation or who are most um, sensitive to what's going on, who are the ones who step up. Um, so I think it's a combination. I think it's a group or a team deciding that they or feeling that they need direction and leadership, and it's somebody who emerges from that group to say, okay, I'll do this. I'll step up and help us. But there's so many different forms of leadership, right? I mean, even just connecting people and helping a group have a more productive discussion is a form of leadership. It's not always command and control.
So you've interacted with leaders from many sectors and cultures and many countries. So have these different leaders from different areas taught you anything? And how do you think these leaders from different areas, lead compared to how you do?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the most interesting cultural difference for me in terms of leadership was sort of, I guess, when I moved to China. And, you know, if you take something like the United States or Canada and China, they're pretty different culturally, particularly also in leadership. So, the United States, for example, is very much individualistic. It's the individual leader, it's the CEO, hero, and in China, it's a more collectivist approach. It's more about um, the success and the harmony in society, and there's more of a collective leadership focus. Um, and China's much more hierarchical. So, it's very much according to Confucian thinking, the different roles in society and the different hierarchies and who should be, accountable to whom. Whereas, maybe in the West, it's much flatter and more egalitarian, less hierarchical. Um, and I think, when I first got to China and I was in this big leadership role, the team would come to me with every little decision, every little problem, because I was the big boss. And they were like, well, but you have to decide. That's the way it's done in China. And I just resisted that. I was not, that's not my style. That's not my way of doing things. I tend to try and push as much responsibility and decision making as far down in the hierarchy and as far out away from me as possible. Um, and so it probably took about 2 years until people got into the groove and understood where, how and why I was leading the way I was. But, you know, I didn't need to be deciding about menus or bus schedules. You know, people could make those decisions without me or come to me with a problem and a potential solution. And so there's a real apprenticeship, there's a real training. So I think that no matter what leadership culture you grow up with or grow up in, change is possible and different forms of leadership are possible and can be even very successful. Uh, a couple of years into me running the office in China in that way, we went from being a sort of a weird place that people didn't want to work because they didn't know about NGOs and non-government, non-business. It was a very strange thing to being like an employer of choice. So we had literally hundreds of applications for every position we opened because word got out that there was like this different culture where you could come in as a young person into this organization and have a lot of responsibility and a lot of learning, and so it became a very exciting place for young talent to come. And I think that was a direct result of a different leadership culture within the organization than was common in the country and in the community. But yes, I think so. I think two things are true. I think leadership styles and leadership roles can be different from country to country and culture to culture. But I also think that there are some universal things around empowering others, lifting other people up, um, mobilizing people behind an exciting mission or vision that are universally true. And it doesn't matter what leadership context you're in. Leaders who have those skills and have those abilities can make things happen in any leadership context.
Thank you very much, Mr. David Aikman, for your time, and we really appreciate your support and your initiative and taking out time from your very busy schedule for 1 hour for us today.
Your insights on leadership, empathetic leadership to be particular, and also earning the position that you're in are definitely food for thought that I feel like more young people have to think more of, right? So thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you.
And thank you for listening to our podcast series, The Leadership Seat with Abhyuday and Nayantara, and we will see you in the next one.
A special thank you to Prime College for supporting us and Monal D for guiding us throughout.